President Biden said something terrifying. We better hope it's a gaffe. This is the record. Last night, President Biden was at a fundraiser in New York City. In speaking to the attendees, President Biden stunned everyone, bluntly warning that the world faces its highest prospect of nuclear war in 60 years. President Biden also said his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, is not joking when it comes to using nuclear weapons. The president also quoted as saying, "We have not faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis." And today, the Pentagon responded to the president's remarks and appeared to throw cold water on his comments. The Defense Department saying there are no signs that Russia is planning to use nukes. The president's comments coming amid new reports that Putin's inner circle is becoming frustrated with how the war in Ukraine is playing out. Foreign correspondent Shelby Wilder has the latest from Kyiv. Shelby?
Hi, Greta. It's good to be with you. Well, look, in a bid for new long-range rockets, the Ukrainian government is now offering the U.S. full visibility over its intended list of Russian targets. Now, Pentagon officials have supplied Ukraine's military with billions of dollars worth of equipment since the invasion began here in Ukraine by Russia. But U.S. is also hesitant to supply these long-range Army tactical missile systems, fearing that it could escalate the war even further. The U.S. has rejected Ukraine's prior requests, fearing that the projectiles could be used to hit targets inside Russia. But Ukraine is offering the U.S. a veto, essentially, of its list of targets, which include logistical lines, bases, and ammunition depots in Ukraine's east and south, including Crimea. Now, Ukrainian officials have said that receiving these long-range missiles from the U.S. would allow it to reach specific targets that it cannot do at present. An example of this are launch pads of Iranian-supplied drones, which are being launched from Crimea, where Russian forces received these drones at the end of September. And we've really just seen the considerable damage that these Iranian-made drones have really caused here in Ukraine, even over the span of this last week. But while the U.S. is not yet convinced to hand over these missiles, Russia's annexation of eastern Ukraine has muddied the red lines for the U.S. Now that Russia claims that 4 regions of eastern Ukraine are part of the Russian Federation forever. But President Zelensky has said that these long-range missiles are crucial to Ukraine's success, and especially for their wider gains here on the ground.
Shelby, is there any thought or discussion on the ground there that if the U.S. were to take that offer and having veto power over the targets, that is bringing the U.S. even in deeper, almost bringing NATO in deeper into this war when NATO has tried to stay out of this war?
Look, I think the U.S. is really concerned about escalating this war further. As you said, they are afraid that if Ukraine gets these missiles, that they could carry out an attack, and then Russia will say, look, it's happened in the mainland of Mother Russia, and now we can use it as a justification to escalate the war even further. The U.S. is also saying that Ukraine is doing considerably well with the amount of weapons they've received at present, so they don't really feel the need to hand over these long-range missiles. But I will say that Ukrainians are just sort of wishing that the U.S. would overcome this psychological barrier and really supply the long-range missiles, because Zelensky has said that this is really key for not only continuing their success with their offensive, but hopefully bringing a speedier end to this needless war.
Thank you. Shelby Wilder from Lviv, Ukraine. And former State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert joins me. Good evening, Heather. And listening to Shelby report this issue about having long-range missiles, if the U.S. were to give them so they could reach further into Russia, does escalate it. But then giving the U.S. veto power over the targets even further drags the U.S. into it. What's your thought about this?
Yeah, so as we watch this, I would be very, very concerned about sending these long-range missiles into Ukraine from the United States at this point. Not to say that at some point we may not want to go there, we might, but right now I would be concerned about that. How would Ukraine use it? Could it end up being shot into a Russian city and killing Russian civilians? We don't want that. That is a severe escalation at this time. And also giving the United States basically target selection, veto power over it, that is giving us the ability to select the targets. So right now, I would just be very cautious about making that move. Now, however, I do think that we need to continue to support Ukraine 100%. They are our friends. They are good people. They deserve our support. And if we don't continue to fully back the Ukrainian people and President Zelensky, then we are telling dictators and awful people all around the world that they can invade a sovereign country's territory. We're giving them the green light if we don't continue to support Ukraine. I think we will. I think we're firm behind Ukraine. Biden was late to the party in supporting Ukraine, but finally, I think we're there and we're in an okay spot.
Well, the president said at this fundraiser, I realize it's a fundraiser, but he's not a U.S. senator. He is the president of the United States. Everything he says, the world sort of hangs on. He uses the word Armageddon, and he talks about nuclear weapons, that the president of Russia is not joking. I can't get whether, whether he's just, if he's deliberately putting those out there, those comments, or he's putting them at risk, or thinking he's sort of in a private household and it's not going to go farther. But I don't understand some of the comments he makes in a very serious situation.
And the president is known to make an awful lot of gaffes, but I'm not sure that this one is actually a gaffe. I would not have advised him to have used that word Armageddon. Not only is it terrifying, it's frightening for a lot of people, but it is a very serious word. And when you're talking about the prospect of nuclear war, you want to be very careful. I think what he is probably trying to do here is message to the American people and to the world that we're going to be in this for quite some time. And I think one spot where President Biden has failed, or at least failed early on, was to properly message this to the American people. We're spending billions of dollars in Ukraine, and I think we're right to do so. But we keep seeing these messages come out from Congress about how much money the U.S. taxpayer is paying, and frankly, a lot of Americans are concerned about that, and I understand their concerns about where this money is going. But this is the right fight. We've got to do it. We've got to stick up to this bully, and we have to defend our friends and defend their territorial integrity.
Okay, you're 3 days back from Poland. You talk to people in Poland. It's always different when you're there on the ground. Any sort of reflection on, what struck you actually being there this week?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's the generosity of the Polish people. Many countries, Greta, as you and I discussed, will not just accept all of these refugees into their country, but Poland has welcomed them with open arms, bringing them into their homes, providing them food, shelter, and the Ukrainian people are not just going there and getting government assistance, they're actually working. They want to work. They're taking on jobs, and they're frankly paying taxes. So I think it goes to the generosity of the Polish people. But they are in a very precarious situation, Greta. I mean, essentially, the back office Poland is serving as for the war in Ukraine. So everything pretty much goes through Poland. So they are an ally of ours, a NATO ally, a very good, close, cooperative partner in terms of our security and their security as well. So I think we need to be increasingly concerned about Poland's position in this and make sure we're taking care of our friends, which we are, but we just have to keep that support up.
Heather Nauert, always nice to see you. Thank you, Heather. Hope you come back soon. Thank you.
Great to see you, Greta. Thanks.
Okay, was it sabotage or not? Swedish police investigated the mysterious Nord Stream pipeline leak. Correspondent Alex Salvi has the latest.
Greta, good evening. Sweden's security services saying a crime scene investigation into that damage found evidence of detonations. That report goes on to say that the leaks of the Nord Stream pipelines were likely the result of gross sabotage. This despite recent claims by the Kremlin that Western powers were behind a potential attack, a claim that's rejected by the United States and European leaders who are accusing Moscow of drumming up an excuse to cut off gas exports. French President Emmanuel Macron reiterating these concerns during a summit on Thursday.
There's a real convergence of views that among Europeans we need to protect our key infrastructure. We saw that just a few days ago with the attacks against Nord Stream 1. We have key infrastructures that can make us vulnerable, critical infrastructure which concerns the European Union and the other European countries such as gas pipelines, cables, satellites. We need a European strategy to protect them.
Now, despite the remarks by French President Macron, there is no evidence at this time to definitively say that Russia was behind a sabotage effort. We're also learning that the U.S. was actually closer to the site than initially thought, with Reuters reporting today that a reconnaissance aircraft flew near the ruptured pipeline in the Baltic Sea just hours after that damage appeared. Washington right now is saying that that flight was merely routine. Greta?
Alex, what have they concluded there was a state actor? I mean, how do we not know who did this sabotage? I mean, it seems to me that people aren't saying. I can't imagine that, we don't know.
At this point, most governments are saying that it is a state actor, acknowledging not only the type of damage that was done, but how many different ruptures there are on multiple pipelines, by the way. It's not only Nord Stream 1 that was damaged, but Nord Stream 2 as well. There were at least 4 ruptures at different areas, and the depths that they're at as well. Most governments are acknowledging that a state actor had to have been behind this attack in some way. But as of right now, Russia is blaming Western powers. European leaders are blaming Russia. The United States has been relatively silent on this matter altogether. Everybody essentially pointing the finger at one another.
Alex, nice to see you on U.S. soil. Thank you.
Thank you, Greta.
And the Russians are coming. No, seriously, they are. Where they wound up, that's next. The record continues after this.